Thank you, Mr. President. Will the gentleman, the senator from Preston yield?
Does the senator yield? The senator yields.
Senator, thank you. I understand your amendment undoes my amendment that was passed in committee. Is that correct?
If you'll excuse me just a second, I'm having a hard time hearing. I'm going to put my earpiece.
Let me speak a little more clearly. I could hold it a little closer. I'm always happy when somebody says I'm not talking loud enough, you know. It's my understanding, and I've had a hard time locating the amendment for some reason, but my understanding is from what you said is that your amendment undoes the amendment that was passed in committee.
Only partly, but that would be correct.
And what part does it undo?
Well, the two parts which would undo is the limit of the number of pilot public charter schools. I believe the committee amendment reduced that to 3, and I'm restoring that to 10.
So that undoes that amendment, so
yes.
Go ahead.
And the second part which it undoes is that it removes the cap of the statewide virtual public charter schools of 1,500 and restores it to 5%.
Okay, so it's 5% of the total number of students in West Virginia.
That's my understanding.
Yeah. Do you know how many students that is, Senator?
Probably about 22,000. Would that be right? No, that'd be
I'm
about
sorry,
10%. So
for the virtual schools, let's take them individually. How many is it for virtual schools?
Excuse me, say it again.
What is the 5%? What is the total number of students that could go to virtual school based on your increase back to the 5%?
Council advises me about 12,500. I believe I cited what I thought was 10% before, and I apologize.
Could you move your microphone a little closer?
Yes, I believe that would be about 12,500.
Yeah, my calculation is based on, you know, an average of 265,000 students, 13,250.
Okay, that I could believe that.
Do you know how much money follows those students if they would get the maximum 5% in statewide virtual schools?
Well, I've never multiplied it out, but it's my understanding that the state portion of that is around $4,000 to $5,000 per student.
And actually the total amount going to a student's around 14,000, and it's a little unclear. Do you know what the 90% figure is? 90% of what the student gets goes to the charter school, in this case virtual charter schools. Do you know what that amount is?
Not offhand. Sir, I do not know that.
I'm sorry?
No, sir, I do not know that.
Okay, that's fair enough. So if we get the maximum amount of virtual students, 5%, and we get the maximum amount of non-virtual students of 10%, what is the total number of students that could be taken out of the public school system?
Well, I would say that none would be taken out of the public school system because, in fact, a charter school is a public school also.
You're going to make me ask you this question because nobody's been able to answer this question. What is the difference between a public charter school and a private charter school?
Well, I think that a private charter school can charge tuition, but a public charter school is funded by the public.
That's the only difference. So it's just a matter of tax dollars, isn't it?
There's probably other differences too, but I'm really not able to discuss them with you because I don't know competently.
Well, and the reason I'm asking you, Senator, is you want, the idea behind the original amendment was to take a look and see how these charter schools work out. Now, we're kind of going back to the wide open numbers with your amendment. I mean, do you think it's important that we know how much money is going to be taken out of the public school system? Because you understand that for every charter student, whatever money flows out of whatever money goes to that student flows out to the charter school, comes out of the public school system. Did you know that?
Yes, I do know that, but I would also say that the charter school system is also a public school. It's just a different type of public school because it's publicly funded.
But that's the only thing that's public about it, right?
There would be a bit of competition.
That's the only thing that is public about it, is that it is that they're using public money. Is there anything else that's public about it?
I think that they're still under the county board and the state board as far as oversight goes.
Yeah, there's a provision in this bill says the charter school is its own governing body. Did you know that?
I believe they have to follow guidelines, though, and that is the whole purpose of a charter. And if they're not following their guidelines, or if they're incompetent in their delivery of education, it may be discontinued.
And again, sir, if you could hold the microphone a little closer, I'm having a hard time hearing you.
I apologize.
That's all right. I'm trying to keep it right here on my chin, Senator. Do you know how many positions should the full amount, and I got this from the State Board of Education, do you know how many positions are potentially could be lost, how many public school positions potentially could be lost if the maximum number of students, the 5% for virtual charter schools and the 10% for non-virtual charter schools came to fruition?
I do not.
Okay. It would be 3,900 public school positions in the state. Were you aware of that?
Would the educators in a public charter school also be a public employee?
No. They're going to be employed. Do you know who's going to run these charter schools, Senator? Did you realize that they're going to be for-profit companies?
No, sir.
Yeah, they're for-profit companies. On the virtual side, there's two major players, and one of them is a public company, which means their stock is traded on the stock market. Were you aware of that?
I guess now that you told me that, I'm aware of it.
Does it concern you at all that companies whose stock is traded on the stock market, that they worry about that stock price?
I guess
you'd agree with me, wouldn't you?
I guess the answer I have for you is I'm not particularly concerned as how they're organized as a business, but I am concerned as how education is delivered to our students.
Well, I agree with that. Do you have any idea how these virtual schools are going to work?
I'm not an educator, nor do I have any privy knowledge to how the charter schools mechanics work.
Me either, and that was the incentive behind the amendment, and the reason I think it was bipartisan is we don't know how they're going to turn out. But if we send, and by my calculations, and I received these from the department too, at a minimum, it appears that about $7,400 per student will be the 90% figure that will follow the student to the charter school. Now, if we have the total amount of 13,250 students go to virtual charters, and believe me, it's commercialized. They'll be, soliciting virtual charter students around the state. Whether they get all 13,250 or not, I don't know. But if they do you know how much money that is in total out of our state budget?
No, I do not.
It's $98 million just for the virtual charter schools. $98 million, and we've never done one. Don't have one. If you look on the internet, there's all kinds of lawsuits involving these. One of them changed their name because of what went on in other places and other states. But $98 million. Now, when we asked in committee why virtual charter, do you agree with me that there's a big difference between virtual charter schools and non-virtual charter schools, and that non-virtual charter schools have to have a school building and they have to have teachers in the classroom and they got to have chairs and desks and cooks and janitors and security and all the other stuff that goes with the school that you and I went to?
Yeah, yes, I do agree. There is a difference between a non-virtual and a virtual public charter school.
Sure, in a virtual charter school, you got a guy somewhere or a lady somewhere in their house or, sitting behind a desk, teaching any number of children. In Florida, it's 274 students per instructor. I just happened to read an article on it. I mean, that's how many. Do you know why we would have to give the same amount of money to a virtual charter school that we're given to a non-virtual charter school? In other words, one that has a school building and one that does not?
I do not know that.
And that's why I'm asking you about your amendment. Why are we going back on the limit of 1,500 till we can figure out why? Can you explain that?
Well, I would just say that, first of all, this is not mandating that any virtual public charter schools be created, but it allows virtual public charter schools to be created pursuant to various regulations and authorizing bodies. And just because it's authorized doesn't mean it's going to happen. But on the other hand, if they're not performing as we see fit, then that can always be changed going forward. I have full confidence that in some situations, some students learn better in a virtual environment. And it's obviously not true for everyone, as we've seen in the last pandemic.
I'll accept all that. But why do they need $98 million? Why do they need $7,400 per student if the non-virtual charter schools only need $7,400 per student, when their costs have got to be vastly different? Can you explain that?
Well, I don't know what the business model is for the virtual charter school or what the cost would be. However,
could you put a little closer, sir? I can't hear.
I'm not aware of what the business model for virtual charter schools would entail or how they work their business, but I'm assuming that there was a good reason that education delivered to one person should be equal to education delivered to another person. And
well, I asked the question in committee, and they told me, the speaker under oath told me that there were two reasons. One, that it had cost them $50 million to develop their software, and that was for the whole country. And that the biggest cost they had was teacher salaries. So I did some math. If you took the 270 students that they use in Florida per instructor, they'll need 49, that's a 4 and a 9, to educate 13,250 students, 49 instructors. If we paid them $100,000 a year, that would only be $4.9 million. That's $100,000 a year. That's double what our public school teachers make. Now, I thought West Virginia, we might demand a little more, so I thought maybe 100 students per instructor. That requires 132 and a half instructors. And multiplying that by 100,000, that's $13,250,000. Now, subtract that from 98 million, and that's a high number. That means they're going to make profit every year of $93 million. Now, there's other expenses. They got to buy computers. They got to have probably administrators and everything else, but surely they can do that for $93 million, wouldn't you think?
Like I say, I'm not familiar with their business model, but not being involved with that, I would have to say probably.
But Senator, that's why I'm asking you about your amendment, because it's your amendment. Mm-hmm. You're willing to return those limits back to 13,250 students without any better explanation. You're willing to return it to 10 charter schools, even though we've never had charter schools in West Virginia. You're willing to do that without having any of the answers that I just asked you about?
Well, I do know that several years ago we had Senate Bill 14, and in that bill we did not consider, at least it never made it to the final cut, virtual public charter schools.
Now, this is the first time.
However, we did have 10 pilot public charter schools in that bill that made it to the floor and passed out.
I agree. This is the first time we've considered virtual charter schools.
On the Senate floor, to my knowledge, that's correct.
Me too. But we don't know anything about them. You and I, between us, you're the proponent of the amendment. I'm the person who reduced it to $1,500 just for the first 3 years. That's all it is, just the first 3 years, so that we can get a handle on these costs and understand why they require so much of our tax dollars to do what should be done at half of the cost of a non-virtual private school. And I'm asking you, what is your reason for removing that cap, returning it to 5% of our entire student population without any knowledge of any of those issues that we just discussed between us?
Well, it's my understanding that in most other states, there's a very small percentage of the students that actually participate in virtual public schools or virtual public charter schools, either one. And I would imagine that there's going to be a small percent that would try it here.
Then why not keep it at 1,500? In Florida, there's tens of thousands of them. And that could happen here in West Virginia. So why not, if you believe that there's not going to be very many of our students participate in virtual charter schools, why not put the 1,500 limit on it and keep it?
No, your assumption is that it's going to be damaging to the state to include virtual public charter schools, and I'm assuming that it's not going to be damaging. I think it's going to be beneficial. And I would hate.
I'm sorry, I just didn't hear
I
you.
said, your assumption is that it'll be damaging to our state in order to have authorized virtual public charter schools, and my assumption is that it will not be damaging, it will be helpful.
Except that neither one of us know for sure. So wouldn't we be better off to keep a good eye on our tax money and limit the number to 1,500 so we can evaluate it for just 3 years and see if it is good for our state, rather than taking a wild guess and perhaps risking $98 million every year for 3 years?
Well, in fact, there are other checks and balances in place, including the requirement that a charter school, whether it is virtual or brick and mortar, go through a vetting process with authorizers.
Well, we're going to have a gubernatorial board that's going to be the second authorizer if the boards of education don't want them, which up until now they haven't wanted any. So that's part of this bill, is creating a new authorizer. Do you know that?
I was aware of that, yes.
Yeah. And let me ask you just a couple last questions, Senator. We have for-profit companies, and we both know that for-profit companies have to make a profit. And we're going to give them potentially $98 million of our money. Do you know what check or balance is in there that, should they run amok, that we could come in and stop them?
Did you understand that? I'm not sure I understand your question, and maybe I just didn't hear you correctly.
Sure, you said that there would be ways that we could keep an eye on them if they weren't working correctly. Can you tell me what those ways are in the bill?
Well, one way is that every year the legislature passes a budget bill, and we keep an eye on what the expenditures are, both in education and in every other agency.
Do you know that the bill says that if they are each awarded a 5-year contract, and they can only be revoked under circumstances where the health and the safety of the student is at risk?
Well, I think that the amendment that I have here further expands the reasons for a charter school contract to be revoked, including failure to meet generally accepted standards of financial management.
I'm sorry,
Also,
sir, I'm losing you again. I didn't understand that part of your amendment. I'm glad you brought that up.
Yeah.
Tell me again.
Yes, one of the provisions of the amendment to the amendment is an expansion on the reasons for which a charter contract can be revoked at any time, which includes the failure to meet generally accepted standards of financial management, a material breach of the charter contract, a substantial violation of any provision of law from which the public charter school is not exempted, and the dire and chronic academic deficiencies.
But they're exempted from all education standards. You know that. All. Did you know that?
I'm not sure that I knew that.
Yeah, that's the whole purpose of them. They get exempted from all of our education standards. I asked the question, why don't we exempt our public schools? And that didn't get a good answer either. But let me ask you one other question. Do you know how much money Ohio lost in their charter school programs?
I do not.
$4 billion. That's with a B, $4 billion. Now, that's 1 year of our entire budget. I just would ask you again and ask you the justification for taking those caps off of virtual and non-virtual charter schools until we understand what we're undertaking here. It may be the greatest thing in the world, and 3 years isn't going to make a bit of difference for having those caps on them. We'll be able to see them start out, see how they progress. I have to oppose your amendment, but thank you.
Thank you, Senator.
Is there further
Mr.
discussion?
President, may I continue?
Continue.
I'm not against, I don't like charter schools. I don't think they fit in West Virginia. Nationwide, rural areas do not do well with charter schools. All of West Virginia is a rural area, Mr. President. But, I know who's in charge here. I know who makes the decisions, and it's not my team. So I know this bill's going to pass, and I certainly want to give charters a chance because you all want to give them a chance. But to turn them loose with these kind of numbers, a potential transfer of $98 million in public funds to virtual charter schools, for-profit charter schools, at least one of whom is a public company and who watches its stock price every day, at least one of whom's stock price is affected by its profit and loss, is going to be educating our children with $98 million. And if they paid teachers $100,000 a year, double our average teacher salary in this state, their gross profit before their other expenses is $93 million. Now, are we going to do that? Are we really going to allow that to happen in this body? Are we going to tell the public that we're willing to risk $98 million because we think this is a good idea? Nobody can explain where that money goes. Nobody can explain why the virtual charter schools need double what the non-virtual charter schools do. I shouldn't have said it like that. Need the same amount as the non-virtual charter schools, because you understand that non-virtual charter schools are brick and mortar schools. They have to pay, all the people that you have in a regular public school, the cooks, the janitors, the security guards. They got to pay liability insurance. There's no liability insurance for a virtual charter school because they don't have anybody coming to class. Everybody's in their own home. If it's unsafe, the parents bear the burden. But yet we're going to pass this bill with no restrictions whatsoever because of this amendment. I think that charters are bad, but I'm willing to take a shot with the rest of you if we had some reasonable caps on what we're about to risk in this state. The amount of money, there's no fiscal note to this. There's no note about what it's going to do to our public school employees across the state. But remember, every county that you represent is going to lose students because of the virtual charter school if they go. They're going to lose positions in their public schools because those students are going to leave and the money's going to go with them. Same thing with the non-virtuals. If the student leaves, the money goes with it. And as I said, if the entire 32,000 leave, somewhere around 3,900 public school employees are going to lose their jobs. Maybe they'll pick up a job in the charter school. Maybe for double the money, maybe for half the money. But whatever happens, we'll have no say over it. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm not trying to be a fear monger. I'm going to sit here and vote for this bill. If we had those limits in it of 3 charter schools over 10 years, we've had 0. And if we limited it to 1,500 virtual charter school students over the next 3 years so we can see where our money's going before it's all gone like it was in Ohio. They're not getting their $4 billion back. And if we spend $98 million for 5 years, that'll be $500 million and we won't see it either. I urge a no vote on this amendment, Mr. President.